Welcome to the 1662 Fellowship of North America, where we promote the historic Anglican formularies as the theological center of gravity for Orthodox Anglicanism in North America. I am Isaac Rayberg, the Archdeacon for Liturgy in the Anglican Diocese of All Nations and the Rector of All Saints Anglican Church in San Antonio, Texas. This is our second episode of our 1662 Fellowship videos. And in this episode, we're going to introduce the 1662 Book of Common Prayer. So obviously, this is the edition of the Book of Common Prayer that was first published in 1662. It is still the official Book of Common Prayer in the Church of England to this day. But the question is, if we're not from England, why is the 1662 Book of Common Prayer so important? Well, the 1662 is the gold standard for Anglican liturgy, particularly the theology behind our liturgy. And we find this actually articulated in both the Anglican Church of North America's fundamental declarations and the GAFCON Jerusalem Declaration. So this is declaration number 6 of the ACNA fundamental declarations. We receive the Book of Common Prayer as set forth by the Church of England in 1662, together with the ordinal attached to the same, as a standard for Anglican doctrine and discipline, and with the books which preceded it as the standard for the Anglican tradition of worship. And then we have Article 6 of the GAFCON Jerusalem Declaration, which says, "We rejoice in our Anglican sacramental and liturgical heritage as an expression of the gospel, and we uphold the 1662 Book of Common Prayer as a true and authoritative standard of worship and prayer to be translated locally and adapted for each culture." I particularly love the way that the GAFCON Declaration points that the 1662 is a faithful expression of the gospel. It's part of our heritage as an expression of the gospel. And the fact is that every province in the Anglican world used the 1662 at one time or another, if only when it was still a missionary effort or even a colony of the Church of England. So this is part of our common heritage as Anglicans. It's not just reserved for the people of England itself. And what we find in the 1662 is a vehicle for word and sacrament in light of the most important features of Reformation theology. So the most important feature of all the Reformation was upholding the supremacy of Scripture, the ultimate authority of the Holy Bible. We sometimes call that sola scriptura. And we see that the lectionaries of the classical prayer book, particularly here in the 1662 in its original form, give us so much of the Bible in a way that we can easily digest it as we go throughout the year. Also, of those Reformation theological distinctives or those emphases, that idea of justification by faith through grace. Everything in the prayer book, in the classical prayer book, is pushing this idea that we are justified by faith through grace, not of our works. It's not our doing, it's all about God. Because of these things, the 1662 really is an essential part of our Anglican heritage and should be part of our theology. You should have a copy on your shelf, even if you're not going to use it in your local church or your private devotions as your primary liturgy. You should have a copy and you should be familiar with it. Why is this? Well, we find that some of the more modern editions are intentionally or unintentionally a little ambiguous at times in its theology, and in particular in the rubrics. And what we find is that having the 1662 as a reference point, again, as our fundamental declarations in the ACNA and our Jerusalem Declaration from GAFCON point out, is that the 1662 clears up some of that ambiguity. It really tells us what we are to do and what we believe. It doesn't let things get muddled, as has unfortunately been the case with some modern revisions. But it also ends up being a point of comparison and reference for our historic practices. If we truly do believe we are a historic church, we should act like it. And that means we need to understand where we've come from. And there is no better edition of the Book of Common Prayer to help us with that than the 1662. So, what should you have? Well, there's really two options. There is a standard 1662 or an international edition that's recently been published. And that international edition is admittedly a little less official than the standard. You'll find that this is a copy of the official one from several years ago, so it has not yet reflected the reality of a new monarch in England. But basically, the only thing that would be changed would be the uh, name from Elizabeth to Charles, and the gendered pronouns from king to queen, or from queen to king. But what we find in the classical 1662 is that we do have, because of those state prayers, it can be argued that this is in many ways closer to that historic norm. It is the more official version, at least for England. Um, but there have been some modern revisions to some of the rubrics and to the lectionary in these standard ones. So while the state prayers are going to be a lot more in line with the norms, the historic norms, and you can see how much less thick the standard is than how much thinner it is than the international edition. You should be aware that there have been revisions, and so it might not always give you the exact historic picture. Alternatively, you could get the 1662 International Edition. What's the strengths of the International? Well, the state prayers are generic, so you can pray them even if you're not part of the Great Britain or the British Commonwealth, or the Commonwealth nations, or part of the Church of England. There has been some spelling and minor bits of terminology that have been updated, which might help us, those of us who are coming to this fresh. And probably my favorite aspect of the 1662 International is that it does have the original daily office lectionary, which is a lot more comprehensive, systematic, and robust than some of these later revisions. But the International Edition also has wonderful appendices that can be very helpful as we want to see the formularies as our theological center of gravity. So some of these appendices include the homily on justification from the first book of homilies. Why is that included as an appendix? Well, the 39 articles of religion specify the homily on justification as being of particular edification, so that has been included as an appendix. We also have some additional rubrics in the appendices. That can help in terms of maybe applying some of the way we approach the 1662 to some more modern situations, things that weren't really envisioned back in the mid 17th century. So these supplemental rubrics taken from other official editions of the prayer book can be very helpful. It also has a second lectionary, the 1961 Daily Office Lectionary, which is based on the church year. So the editors of the International Edition thought that 1961 revision, if you're going to use one that's based on the church year rather than the calendar year, the civil calendar year, that's a good one to use. I'm honestly not as familiar with that as I am with the standard lectionary, which again, I recommend. That is so good. It has a glossary for some unfamiliar terms, so that's very good for people new to the classical prayer books, as well as part of the appendices are a how-to guide for morning prayer, Holy Communion, and evening prayer. So that is the 1662 Book of Common Prayer. And again, if you are here in North America and you have to only get one book, I would recommend this international edition, but it doesn't hurt to have a standard one on your shelf either. And I trust as you go through this classical prayer book, you'll start to see the robust theology reflecting that of our reformers, but also of the fathers of the church. That's really why I fell in love with the classical prayer books myself, was when I really got to see the theology. It just became so beautiful. Initially, I was actually turned off a bit by the more archaic forms of English, that more Tudor style English. But even that, I've come to absolutely love the beauty of it. It's a lot less of a learning curve than you might think, and either way, it is worth having. In future episodes, we're going to be um, looking at some tips in our next episode for applying the 1662 in a congregation that might not use the 1662. I look forward to seeing you then. Be sure to hit like and subscribe and share this widely if it's been helpful. Thank you so much.